Hey, it's Paul Banis at GreatDad.com, and I'm here again doing my weekly series, my added episode about resilience. I'm studying resilience right now and digging in deep based on the work I've been doing with positive intelligence. So I'm talking to experts about resilience, trying to define what resilience is and how do we get it? How do we develop it? And I've got today, I think I'll get the first person on who's really a resilience expert. I've had some other guests who've talked about resilience or kind of come at it from another angle, but I've got Michael Ostrolenk on with me today, who knows a little more, I think, than what we've gotten so far. So welcome, Michael.
Thank you. I appreciate having me on. Look forward to this conversation.
Yeah, so you're a resilience coach. You do resilience, you work with groups as well. I know you do some intimacy coaching as well with couples, but I'm assuming that your major focus is on this resilience work. Maybe start out why that's something that's important to you.
Yeah, so it actually came out of an experience I had, 14 years ago. Are you familiar with SEAL Fit? Commander Mark Divine, SEAL Fit. So I spent a decade working for them, but prior to working for them, I did their 3-week SOF Academy. It's a pre-budget training program for young men who want to go Navy Special Warfare. I was 39. I was not young. I wasn't going anywhere. And then you finish up Thursday night, Friday for the next 55 hours. You do Kokoro camp, which is not up to hell week. No sleep. You go from one evolution to the other, and you kind of test your metals, what you're made out of. And those experiences, although I was 39, I wasn't going to the Navy. Just being around the young men in the 3-week academy, all of them have their trident. So like 5 guys I trained with, all are now SEALs. One's actually retiring, which is just amazing to think about. I got to spend time with some just amazing men. And then a couple of our trainers were women too. So, it doesn't have to be one or the other, but just amazing men in this case who showed me what we're capable of. And Mark Divine at SEAL Fit talks about 20x. We're capable of 20 times more than we think we are. And I got to prove it both to myself going through those programs and also got to see with some amazing young men going through the programs. And then Mark, after like less than a year after those programs, brought me on to help launch, run, and coordinate some of his programs. So I got even more time and spending time with these just amazing athletes and warriors, law enforcement officers, entrepreneurs who just really want to take their game to the next level.
So that sounds like really what we think about the epitome of resilience, that real Navy SEAL toughness, able to endure all kinds of things. I'm kind of guessing that most of the guys listening to the show probably are not aiming for that level.
Well,
so yeah. I'm interested, how do you I assume that's if your goal is right up here and you still are able to achieve, here, you're still doing pretty well. Is that kind of what
Well, I love that because, not everyone wants to be an elite, special operations guy or military, law enforcement, whatever it happens to be. I get that. So I'll make a distinction. JC Glick and I, as a former Army Ranger, buddy of mine, just launched a men's group called Resilience 2.0. And that literally answers your question. So, and we had a lot of military guys come on, want to join our men's group. And it's a great conversation. And Resilience 1.0, kind of we joked around about it, was like Jocko Willink, you check your watch at 4:30 a.m., you're up, you're working out, or you're David Goggins and you're doing 100 miles before breakfast. And we're like, oh, that's cool. You got to test your metal and see what you're made out of and have physical capabilities. But our basic intention is 2.0 is not that. That's important, yes, let's be physically capable. But are you capable of sitting in your own experience without seeking distraction? Porn, drugs, alcohol, Netflix, work, or whatever one individual does to distract themselves from their own experience. Or are you able to sit with your partner I've been given permission to say this to my women friends, when she's messy, emotionally messy, without feeling the need to fix her. Like, I want to fix her because I feel uncomfortable that she's messy. Like, can I just sit and hold that space for her? Or my kids? Or stepping up as a community leader. It could be at work, it literally could be in your neighborhood. We live in a VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, ambiguous, chaotic, ambiguous. And there might be a need for us men to step forward in various capacities and find that centered, where we're really calm, cool, we're centered, and we're able to be front side focused and take on whatever the challenges that faces our community, our family, our nation state, us as a species, whatever happens to be. So for us, it's like, how do we generate that capability inside the man? Not just like, I can carry heavy shit long distances or I can run really far. That's all great. But I really want to help, and JC and I really want to help men develop the inner capacity to sit with all the things I just mentioned in a very centered, calm, cool, collected, and heart-based way.
Yeah. So I guess I see that first part. So that's kind of I guess from the parlance of the day, it's kind of like a Zen feeling of just being there. And then is there a component too that is when you're then hit with a challenge that you bounce back, or how is that defined within your framework of
Yeah,
resilience?
I love that. And I love like Talon's work, anti-fragility. And if that was a more better word, that could be more popularly used, I would say anti-fragile. Because yeah, you want the system, human system, not to bounce back to what it was, but to bounce back even stronger from whatever the baseline was. And that's kind of the conceptual framework that we use.
Oh,
So
you're
yeah,
learning from the challenge and bouncing back, but then also gaining some knowledge or maturity or evolution from that challenge.
I love maturity. You can say character development. You can say mental toughness, emotional resiliency, physical capacity building. Because a lot of this, we live in a physical body, so a lot of this is physical. So yeah, all that, and I love the word character. I don't think it's used enough. I think it's poo-pooed a lot in our culture. Like there are certain characteristics which to me would indicate resilience, like courage, bravery, if you want to look at it that way. Integrity. Are you in alignment with your values? Are you actually front side focused? Be able to complete the task. Our society is very ADD, especially with the technology. And a lot of people seem unable to complete the task or be so distracted, or find those distractions which allow them not to feel whatever's going on outside of themselves, or not to understand what's going on for their partner, their wife, or their kids, or their neighbors, whatever it happens to be.
So the component of not only, I guess, bouncing back, learning, putting yourself out there with the people surround you. I'm just trying to get deeper into
Yeah.
how this works. I have heard from several other people about the importance of establishing your values, establishing your why as being a key building block. Do you think that's a major part of this, or is that one of the components of resilience?
So actually, that's a great question. I break it down into 4 different pillars.
Okay.
One is physiological, one is psychological, one is social, and one's environmental.
Okay.
And the physiological one is basically like I work with people's sleep, diet, nutrition, movement, and fitness, stress management, circadian biology, 24-hour day-night cycles. Because if we dial those things in and your body's optimized, not maybe it's the max, but at least optimizing, you're much more capable of dealing with whatever is coming your way, whether it's internal stuff that's going on inside of you or your spouse or your workmates, whatever it is. So first thing I like to do is like, hey, how do we dial in your physiology to make your whole system stronger? And then we do the character, then we do the psychological. And I'll break down the psychological if that's okay. And then you can ask questions: cognitive, emotional, somatic, energetic, and spiritual. And for me, spiritual part of that is those values you talk about, or the why. Because once a man has a why, or a human being has a why, they're capable of so much more than they could have ever imagined. So why is very important. So is one's values.
Okay. All right. You mentioned spirituality. I'm not, I mean, maybe I'm a spiritual person, but I'm a secular person. I'm a secular humanist, for lack of a better word. But I am curious as to whether there are experts who are out there, and I don't know if this is an area that you know a lot about, but the role of Christianity or the role of other organized religions in resilience, if that's one way, if that's another tool in the toolbox, or in your philosophy, is it more of a really fundamentally important anchor? How do you feel about that?
So I would make a distinction between someone who claims to be spiritual and someone who's religious, and they can be one and the same for some people, like you said, but yours is spiritual. So I don't care if someone comes to me and they have to have a religious proclivity, like I'm a Greek Orthodox Christian or Roman Catholic or Hindu or Jewish or Buddhist, whatever it is, and that faith is important to them, and there's practices within that faith that are important to them. Doesn't matter what I believe. I do help them stay on and deepen their path if it's important to them. If it's not, then it's not a big deal. But if it is, then I find that a lot of the stuff within any of these religious traditions can help people become more resilient, more capable, more loving, more heart-centered, and able to deal with whatever comes your way. I mean, things are, like just to look at the Bible, if you just want to look at the monotheists from the Middle East, there's a lot of things about resilience, and standing strong and being powerful and, send me, those kind of things.
Well, certainly in the Old Testament, there are like a million and one challenges testing whether people are gonna stand up or not. There's something in there that you said too that I hear a lot about is the role of habits, and you were talking about it in construct of spirituality or religion. But are habits part of that too? Is like creating these really positive habits, atomic habits?
100%. Like, I mean, if you work with me, you'll be creating, either you'll be deepening your habits that already exist, or you'll be creating a whole bunch of new ones. Because for me, part of the work is what your AM rituals. What do you do to wake your body up, your mind up, your heart up to take on the day? And PM ritual, what do you do to reflect back on the day? To what are the lessons learned? Not to beat yourself up, but lessons learned. What could I have done better or differently? And then how do I modify my system, my like physical system, to prep for sleep, to bring it down? And, you know, there's a red light. There's like, you know, the blue light goggles and the eye shades you can wear, and melatonin and magnesium. That's not really important. But like, you know, AM PM rituals, those are habits. Like, what do you do to bookmark your day? And then I think it's really important to have a wide variety of habits. And for my clients, like journaling is one of them. And, you know, you asked about values and stuff. I have a practice that I have all my clients do every day, where they choose a value. They have to go from abstract to concrete. So they might say, you know, I want to be more present with my spouse. Cool. I don't know what you mean by present. Like, I play the stupid inspector, right? What do you mean by present? And they might say, oh, I don't know. Just be more present. Like, that doesn't cut it. Like, you need to define it very clearly to me and yourself, more importantly, and your spouse, the behaviors which would indicate to you that you're being more present. And the guy might say, oh, okay, eye contact. Cool. All right. I'm not gonna be on my phone when I'm talking to her. Okay, cool. And they might come up with 2 or 3 or 4 other things that would indicate to them that they're being present. And then checking the end of the day, like, how did you do that? Were you present with your wife? Oh shit, I'm on my phone. Okay, I can course correct. Check with your wife. How present does she feel you're being with her? That's just, I mean, that's a huge test. And she could be having a bad day, and even if you're 100% present, call you out on it. That's a different story. But like, you know, you need to pay attention to your behaviors, because it's not what you think. I mean, thinking is important, and feeling is important too. But like, how you actually behave indicates to me how aligned you are with your values. Not just because I want to be more present and I think about it. No, actually, how are you being more present, or more loving, or more caring, compassionate, whatever they happen to be? You want concrete behaviors. So that's a discipline. That is a practice. That is a habit that I have them do every day. And there's probably a dozen others that are like that I just want people to start thinking about and doing on a daily basis.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just think that the whole presence thing about, and maybe that's an interesting thing to look at, is that whether in this scenario, like asking your partner about whether you're present, I was just thinking like asking her whether you are being present in the way that she defines it. But maybe that's a different outward looking thing. We're talking here about looking inward and trying to establish what you believe are your standards for being present.
So I love that. And I'm a trained marriage and family therapist, so my mind always goes to the interpersonal, the relationship. But I think you nailed it. The first step for me with an individual client is more like, okay, what is my value? How would I know I'm living it? And I'm actually living them out. And then you can engage the spouse. And I would say, like, yes, you engage the spouse in such a way that if you say, I want to be more present, what's that mean for her? How would she like you to be more present? That's also obviously just as important, if not more important, conversation for the marriage or the partnership. But first of all, it's like you said, just what are my values, and am I clear about what they are, and am I embodied?
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction, even if it doesn't get to the core of our resilience, but in terms of relationships, in establishing that, because any partner has gone through that thing where you think you're doing the best in an area and you're actually failing in their eyes, and there's no way that you can discount their reaction and their emotional response. It's still up to you to ask the question and make sure that you are living up to not only what you think you're doing, but also how they perceive it. Since you do a lot of work with like this epitome of the American male, I would like to ask a few questions about how we define masculinity these days, because men are under attack as being toxically masculine, and I think we need to kind of take back the good parts of being men. There's, we're 50% of the population. We can't just remove ourselves from the equation. And as a man, I think there are things that we should be really proud of. What do you think are values, masculine values, that are the good values versus the temptations or the evil and the stuff that we think of as classically toxic versus triggering toxic, if I might call it that?
No, I love that. So I would say one is protector.
Yeah. That one always comes up really fast in my mind too. That's like, there's no way you can criticize that as a.
Well, I no, it's not completely true, because I've gotten pushback when I talk about this. I've trained in the martial arts for like 40 2 years, a long time. And so I've trained some women who can kick my butt, and they're awesome, but they're rare. Like most women are smaller than me or smaller than men in general, or weaker than men in general. So it doesn't, just because there are a few out there who can kick your butt doesn't like the jump, So protector is an important thing for majority of females because of the kind of the violent world we live in. But I've had actually my female friends say, that's not true. We don't need your protection. I'm like, you don't, because you have a you carry concealed and you're really good at hand-to-hand combat, but you're rare. Yeah, so yeah, protector, I would say, is a really big one. And it's not just physical protection, emotional, mental. What are you doing to protect your wife and kids physically, from threats, from the environment? Like, are you there for them? And this goes back to resilience. When they're having a real hard time, how are you showing up for them? And I would say that's a key part of being resilient. It's like, okay, I can sit with their challenges without, like I said earlier, the need to fix them because I feel uncomfortable with what's going on for them. And this is very interpersonal. Like, what do you need from me? Because some spouses, they might just say, I just want to bitch. Okay, cool. Some might say, actually, I want to looking for a solution. Cool, we can work on that. Whatever it is, mind reading doesn't work. And are you able to sit with whatever they request of you in that very moment and provide it to them as a protector?
Yeah.
Like you're holding the space for their emotionalness.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good one. Well, how do you also rationalize the difference between, especially when you talk about resilience, the idea, and maybe they have to be different sides of the same coin, but the fragility versus vulnerability, because we talk about a lot about vulnerability and how that actually can portray strength in some way. But I don't think any man wants to be thought of as fragile. And a lot of men bristle at that idea of vulnerability because it sounds all of a sudden like you're feminine or you're fragile. I mean, maybe feminine is pejorative in this case, but fragile.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So, and I think that's a really important conversation because I'm one to always tell my men that I work with that feel your feelings and learn to express them as appropriate for the situation at hand to the ends that you see. So for instance, I had a client his wife died and they were both in the medical field and he had to take over her business. He had to plan for the funeral. He had to take all the family coming in. Like he had to take care of all this stuff. And in our conversations, he's like, I don't have time to feel the grief because I'm too busy taking care of these things. Mm-hmm. I was like, yeah, you have the responsibility of taking care of your kids and the businesses and all the family coming in, the funeral. Yeah, exactly. And when you find the time, you need to feel what you feel. Otherwise, it's come out sideways, chronic illnesses or psychological issues down the road, depression, anxiety, whatever it is. So like you always want to be aware of what you feel and in the right circumstances, find the right place to feel and express them as appropriate. So I'm not the one to think like, oh, you should always repress your feelings. No, I think it's important to feel them and express them as appropriate, as I said. And remember, feelings are just information that are useful to you to know about yourself. You don't have to follow through on your feelings because our feelings change, like our feelings and thoughts change moment to moment. They're like clouds in the sky, just kind of going across the sky, kind of in the Buddhist terminology of how the mind works. But like, I'm not saying don't take them as serious, but they are information. You don't have to get locked up in them, driven by them, the thoughts or the feelings.
Right. Yeah. And also, I think there's a difference between being overtly feeling versus, like, as you say, taking that information in as a data point. What I think, at least with a lot of my clients, is that there are a lot of men out there who are not even recognizing those feelings. And that's a first step toward knowing yourself. And I think becoming more resilient is knowing how just even the real, true yourself responding to a situation and you recognizing what that is and the difference between what you believe and what the other voices in your head, because everybody's got this inner critic and saboteurs all chattering at you all the time.
Yeah.
And you're fighting off those voices and trying to establish what you want to do based hopefully on your why and your values and the things that are important to you. So.
Yeah, and that one thing I'd add to that, because I'm trained as a somatic therapist, so I bring the body into a lot of this work. And I'll give you one example I think is really useful in terms of resilience and why feelings are important. So if you said, like you and I were working together and you said, oh, this thing makes me angry. I play the dumb Inspector Clouseau. I'm like, I don't know what you mean by anger, but how do you know you're angry? And it's really interesting because it fits to your point. A lot of people, guys, mostly some women, but mostly guys are like, I don't know, I'm just angry. So they have the concept, they have the word, but they're so detached from the physical experience of the emotion that all they have is the word.
Right.
So I'm like, okay, sit with how you know you're angry. And then some of them like, oh, okay, my jaw get tight. I get a little tightness in my chest. I'm holding my breath, some gurgling in my belly. My right knee gets tight, whatever. Everyone organizes themselves differently to different emotions in the physical body. But I use that as valuable information. Cool. Let's stay with that. And how long can you sit with that feeling before you feel the need to distract yourself? And this is where the resilience comes in. I'm really angry, like, oh, I can't be angry. Family of origin taught me anger is not good, or like whatever the message might be. So I repress it and I distract myself. Or grief, sadness, joy, bliss, even the positive things. Some people are taught you don't feel those things. There's nothing to be happy about. This world's hard, whatever it is. And it's like, no, let me help you learn to sit with the full experience that's going on in your body. First step. So you're allowing it to emerge. And then we can manage it towards other ends. Like, you don't have to act on the anger. We can deconstruct that reactive state you found yourself in that probably generated from when you're a kid, for family of origin type stuff. You learned how to protect yourself against real and perceived threats. And you do what you do, because we all have these things that we do. But once you know how you do it, then we can deconstruct it. My ultimate goal for my male clients is freedom. They go from reactive, this is my reactive thing. When I'm angry, I do this. When I'm angry, I do this. To like, oh, I have a choice. There's a moment that I have a choice between going down that path of like holding my breath and my jaw gets tight and I start screaming, yelling, or I can like, no, okay, that's valuable information. I can choose a different path. And I'm not going to tell them what path to choose. And we can play around with it and experiment, but I want them to have some freedom. So they're not being kind of programmed from their past. They're free in that very moment.
Yeah.
And that's resilience to me. One of the expressions of resilience.
Yeah. So do you have any advice for anybody who's kind of going down this path, maybe just waking up to this idea of how important it is to not only become resilient for a greater level of life satisfaction, but also to model resilience to their kids, hopefully creating, better human beings? Anything? I mean, I always hate to you have the 5-second hack, but if somebody were embarking on this, interested in it, what would you suggest as first steps?
Yeah. So besides the physiological stuff I mentioned earlier, like dialing your sleep, your nutrition, your movement, your fitness, your stress management, all that's really important. Yes. And I would say, if you feel whatever you feel and you notice yourself wanting to distract yourself with porn or drugs or alcohol or whatever you do, see if you can extend that period of time for 30 seconds before you literally go off and do whatever you do to distract yourself.
Right.
And then next time, can you do it for 60 seconds longer? You're building the capacity in your system to sit with uncomfortable feelings.
Yeah.
That's resilience. Because the more you can sit with your own uncomfortable feelings, the more you're able to do that with your spouse, and she'll have plenty, trust me, or with your kids, or with whatever that's going on in the world. So that's one exercise. Literally, it's like, can I extend it 30 seconds or 60 seconds or another 30 seconds? And just notice, that's really fascinating, my distraction choices. I feel uncomfortable, I'm going to go eat or whatever I do. Okay. So what I would do with people is extend the period of time from 50, 2 minutes to 3 minutes to 4 minutes to 5 minutes of building resilience in the system. And then can we come up with, at least in the short run, alternative distraction mechanisms that are a little bit healthier? So I would suggest porn and eating bonbons is probably not the best thing. But, maybe there's something else you could do to manage the energy differently, like go for a run, go for a walk, do some meditation, Tai Chi, Qigong, yoga. There's various practices, which are a little bit healthier than the bonbons. But short-term only. Like, my interest for you would be extend that longer, so you don't even need the distractions. You're able to process it right then and there, and it's not going to come back to haunt you 6 months down the road or a year down the road or 20 years later when you have chronic illnesses showing up.
Right. I've heard that too in other realms. Sometimes you've got the temptation before you got the urge to eat the cookie or whatever, and just by waiting it out, sometimes that temptation will pass. Maybe that's not the same thing as what you're talking about, resilience building and trying to extend, not just letting it pass, but trying to extend the time and consciously extending the time. I mean, is that part of that? Is knowing that?
Yeah, consciously extend the time. But it's also cool too. I have an urge to eat that cookie, and I'm going to sit and let the urge go away. That's fine too. Cool. You're building your willpower points. You're owning a resilience against temptation in the real world. You can do that with cookies, then maybe you can do that in the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. So they all build up together to building your inner capacities to thrive in the world, not be driven by your immediate gratifications or whatever they happen to be around you.
So this is a really hard question, is that how do you balance what those short-term pleasures are versus the work of building resilience and putting off gratification, because who doesn't want the cookie? I mean, there's a reason why things like cookie and all the rest of the things that you mentioned exist, is because they do give pleasure. And what is life without pleasure? So are we talking about the balancing between short-term pleasure and short-term bursts of pleasure versus long-term satisfaction, which is a different type of pleasure? Is that the ultimate goal?
Yeah, no, I love that. So I would say yes, and I'm a yes, and for everything. It really depends on the individual where they're at in their life. Yeah, well, because we're talking broad generalizations, but for an individual, be very specific to them, their biography, their family of origin, their story. Because for someone who's highly disciplined, maybe their thing is like, oh, maybe they should have more immediate pleasures, because maybe there's a story going on in their minds, in the back of their mind, saying you can't have pleasures bad, for what religious indoctrination or whatever ethical, whatever wherever it came from, doesn't matter. It does matter, but it comes from somewhere. So for someone who's like highly structured, highly disciplined, highly rigid when it comes to stuff, maybe the reverse needs to be done. Like, maybe you need to actually chill out and have some spontaneity, a bit more pleasure and fun, and work through those contractions against such things. Now, in our culture, we seem to be in the opposite, like immediate gratification, iPhones, iPads, Instagram, the dopamine rush, all that stuff. So like, so majority of us actually probably need less immediate gratification, more discipline, and more, long-term contentment for things. But it can be like really, and let me speak to that briefly. So at SEALFIT, Mark Devine had this concept 20x. You can do 20 times more than you think you can do. And when I work with a lot of those guys at SEALFIT, I was like, man, I came up with a concept called negative 20x. Why? Because some of these guys are such type AAA personalities that they're like, oh, I'm going to do a Tough Mudder, then I'm going to do a Spartan race, then I'm going to do a half marathon, and then next day I'm going to do a full marathon, that kind of stuff. I'm like, wow, awesome. That's nice that you're driven. But then I start wondering, what are you running from? Like there's something driving you away from some experience that you're having inside yourself.
That becomes a new addiction. That becomes just like porn, gambling, all the rest. It becomes an addiction to that.
Exactly. No, you nailed it. And so I came up with the concept of negative 20x is like, instead of running to the next event, why don't you sit with yourself for the next 30 days? And some of these guys, like, man, they would rather go climb real mountains and sit in meditation for 10 minutes a day with their own experience. Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. All right. Well, we've covered a lot of territory. I think we could do probably about 6 or 7 more podcasts on all the different things we've touched on. And I'm glad we were able to come up with a little practical exercise just as a bedrock. But there's so much in here about touching on some things that I've already learned, but then also adding to kind of my lexicon and background, which is changing every day. So if people can find you at michaeldostrolenk.com, and we'll put that in the show notes so people can find it. It's maybe a little bit hard to write down if you're driving. And you do, I know you're not doing the therapy work that you're actually trained to do. You're mostly doing coaching, as you said, in these 3 areas, both resilience coaching for men, groups, and relationship intimacy coaching for.
Yeah. I'm still licensed as a therapist, but I've not practiced since 2000. And that's a whole other conversation about insurance. And the freedom to coach versus being a therapist. But yeah, exactly. You nailed it.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much for spending a little bit of time with me today. And you can find my coaching services at GreatDad.com/go with a bunch of things. I do some group work as well. I coach fathers of biracial kids. I coach men searching for meaning after 55. And then I also have a program in positive intelligence, which kind of builds on this whole resilience idea. It's another methodology to get to this resilience and build on it. And I'm incorporating more and more things that I'm learning from experts and a lot of deep dive into resilience myself. Okay, so take care, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. All right, take care.